The examination hall stretched across 3 levels of the orbital station, and candidates from 47 different species waited in organized groups, according to their home world's designation codes. The nervous energy filled every corner as translators hummed and clicked, converting thousands of languages into something approaching mutual understanding. Marcus Chen stood among the human delegation, watching the information displays cycle through examination rules and requirements for the 3rd time that morning. He had memorized every word during the first cycle, but the repetition seemed to calm the more anxious species around him, particularly the crystalline Velkari, who kept fracturing their outer layers in stress. "Attention all candidates." The announcement boomed through every translation device simultaneously, causing several species to jump or flutter or contract, depending on their particular biology. The Galactic Coalition Survival Assessment will begin in 1 standard hour. This examination has been administered for 6,000 cycles and determines your species' readiness to join our alliance. The insectoid proctor, evaluator Kreitsch, descended from the upper platform on 4 of his 6 limbs, while his remaining 2 manipulated a holographic display that showed a rotating planet covered in various terrain types. His compound eyes reflected the light in strange patterns as he surveyed the assembled candidates with what might have been amusement or contempt. Human xenopsychologists still debated insectoid emotional expressions. The test is simple in concept but difficult in execution. Kreitsch's translator rendered his clicking mandibles into standard galactic. You will be transported to a designated zone on the wilderness planet below. You will survive for 10 standard days, using only tools and structures. You create yourself from one material type of your choosing. Holographic images appeared above each species cluster, showing the available options: stone, metal-bearing ore, bone, wood, clay, ice, and fiber. Marcus watched as species after species made their selections. The rock-fawn Granathi chose stone without hesitation, their natural affinity for lithic materials making it an obvious choice. The aquatic Selnri selected ice, their cold world physiology suited to working with frozen water. The predatory Kresh chose bone, their hunting culture giving them confidence in skeletal materials. Most species chose stone or metal ore, the materials their civilizations had built their early technologies upon before discovering electricity and eventually space travel. These were familiar materials, easy to understand, with obvious applications for tools and shelter. Human delegation. Kreitsch's attention focused on Marcus and the 2 other human representatives. "What is your selection?" Marcus stepped forward, his decision already made weeks before during the preparation sessions back on Earth. "Wood," he said clearly. The examination hall fell silent for exactly 3 seconds before conversation exploded across multiple species. Kreitsch's antennae twitched in what the human diplomats had learned to recognize as surprise. "Wood?" The evaluator's translator carried a tone that might have been mockery. "You understand this is a survival assessment, not an art project. Wood is soft, burns easily, rots when wet, and provides minimal defensive capability against predators." "I understand the material's properties," Marcus replied calmly. "Wood is my choice." The other human delegates, Sarah and James, had chosen stone and metal ore, respectively, for their own trials, but they nodded in support of Marcus's decision. The 3 of them had debated this extensively, and Marcus had made compelling arguments about humanity's long relationship with wooden technology. Keach made a notation on his display with a sharp gesture that suggested skepticism. "Very well. The human Marcus Chun will attempt survival using wood as his sole permitted material. I will personally oversee your evaluation, as this choice has only been made 17 times in 6,000 cycles, and no candidate using wood has ever scored above minimal survival threshold." "How encouraging," Marcus muttered. drawing quiet laughs from Sarah and James. The preparation period lasted another 40 minutes, during which candidates could review holographic maps of their designated zones, study the local fauna and flora databases, and ask questions about the examination parameters. Marcus spent his time carefully examining the tree species that grew in his assigned temperate forest zone. The database listed dozens of varieties, each with different properties: flexibility, density, grain structure, moisture content, and growth patterns. Most candidates would see trees as nothing more than wood, but Marcus recognized the distinctions immediately. His years as a wilderness survival instructor had taught him to identify trees by bark pattern, leaf shape, and even smell. He noted several species that resembled earth equivalents, something like ash with its straight grain and flexibility, a yew analog with incredible tension strength, oak-like trees with dense heartwood perfect for structural elements, and fast-growing softwoods ideal for kindling and quick construction. "You seem very focused on plant taxonomy," a melodious voice interrupted his study. Marcus turned to find one of the harmonics, beings of pure energy contained in crystalline matrices that allowed them physical interaction. "Trees aren't just generic wood," Marcus explained. "Each species has different properties and uses. Choosing the right tree for the right purpose makes the difference between a tool that works and one that breaks at the worst possible moment." The harmonic pulsed with colors that their species use for communication, though Marcus couldn't interpret them without a translator. Fascinating. Most species view materials as uniform categories rather than diverse ecosystems of possibility. "That's probably why most species choose stone or metal," Marcus observed. "They see the material itself as the tool, not the raw ingredient for creating tools." "Final boarding call," Kreitch announced. "Candidates proceed to your assigned transport vessels." Marcus gathered his minimal equipment: a simple jumpsuit with pockets, a water container that would be collected after landing, and a basic medical kit for emergencies. No tools, no weapons, no artificial materials beyond the clothes on his back. The transport ship held 20 candidates from different species, each assigned to separate zones far enough apart to prevent interference but close enough for emergency extraction if needed. Marcus sat in a harness designed for humanoid body types and watched through the viewport as the orbital station receded and the wilderness planet grew. Logger Kreitch's voice came through the ship's communication system. "Upon landing, you will have 10 standard days to demonstrate construction of adequate shelter, procurement of food and water, and defense against the planet's fauna. Bonus evaluation points awarded for innovation, efficiency, and techniques that could be taught to others of your species." The planet's surface rushed up to meet them. Forests, plains, rivers, and mountains spread across the landscape in natural patterns unspoiled by civilization. "Remember," Kreitch added, 47% of candidates failed to complete the examination. 12% require emergency extraction, and only 8% achieve scores high enough to impress the Coalition Council. "Good fortune to you all." Marcus felt the familiar calm settle over him that always came before a wilderness challenge. He wasn't thinking about failure or success, political implications, or species pride. He was thinking about trees when the transport touched down and the hatch opened to reveal a temperate forest filled with morning light and bird-like creatures calling from the canopy. Marcus Chen smiled and stepped into his element. The examination had begun. The monitoring station orbiting the wilderness planet hummed with activity as evaluators tracked 47 candidates simultaneously. Holographic displays showed each participant's location, vital signs, and a comprehensive view of their activities through microdrones that maintained surveillance without interference. Evaluator Kreitch sat at his primary console with 3 of his 6 limbs manipulating different control interfaces, while his compound eyes tracked multiple screens. He cycled through candidates methodically, making notes on their progress or lack thereof. The Granathi candidate had found a suitable rock outcropping and was chipping away at stones to create crude cutting implements, standard approach, minimal innovation. The Selnri had carved ice blocks and constructed an igloo-style shelter competent but predictable. The Kresh was attempting to fashion bone tools from a creature it had killed with its natural claws. Adequate for a predator species, Gritch switched to the human's feed more out of curiosity than expectation. Candidates who chose wood typically spent their first day wandering aimlessly, breaking branches randomly, and attempting to build unstable lean-tos that collapsed during the first night. What he saw made his antennae straighten and surprise Marcus. Chun moved through the forest with obvious purpose, stopping at various trees to examine bark texture, break off small twigs to test flexibility, and even smell the wood. He carried no tools yet, but his systematic approach suggested he was shopping rather than surviving. Interesting, Kreitsch muttered, attracting the attention of his assistant, a floating luminar named Brightness over Still Water. The human appears calm, the luminar observed. Most species show elevated stress markers by this point. He's not gathering materials, Kreitsch noted. He's evaluating them. Look at how he tests each tree before moving on. They watched as Marcus finally selected a young tree, about twice his height with smooth bark and an almost perfectly straight trunk. He spent several minutes examining it from all angles before beginning to cut it down using a sharp-edged stone he'd found. The cutting process took nearly an hour, but Marcus showed no frustration. Once the tree fell, he stripped away branches with precise movements, leaving a clean shaft approximately 2 meters long and 5 centimeters in diameter. Is he making a spear? Brightness speculated. Too flexible for a spear, Kreitsch replied. That species he selected has similar properties to our survey's classification. YT 447 high tensile strength, but significant bend capacity. Marcus's next action confirmed Kreitsch's confusion wasn't unfounded. The human began heating the wooden shaft over a carefully constructed fire, slowly bending it into a curved shape while the heat made the wood pliable. He held the curve in place with other pieces of wood acting as temporary braces. Then let it cool by the founders, Kreitsch breathed. He's recurving the wood to store potential energy. The process took most of the first day. Marcus worked with patient precision, heating and bending, checking the curve symmetry, making minor adjustments. By evening, he had created a curved wooden stave that looked nothing like any tool the evaluators had seen from previous. Candidates Day 2 brought revelation Marcus had spent the night in a hastily constructed but adequate shelter, a simple lean-to that kept him dry during a brief rain. Now he resumed work on his mysterious project, carving notches at both ends of the curved stave and attaching a cord he'd created by twisting bark fibers from a different tree species. It's a projectile launcher. Brightness suddenly understood. Like the ancient mechanical weapons some species developed before discovering chemical propulsion. A bow. Kreitsch accessed Earth's cultural database. Humans used these extensively during their pre-industrial period. Some cultures achieved extraordinary ranges and accuracy. They watched with growing interest as Marcus crafted arrows, selecting straight branches from yet another tree species, something the database identified as similar to ash, prized for its strength-to-weight ratio. He fletched the arrows with thin strips of bark, balanced each one carefully, and hardened the wooden points in his fire. The first test shot flew perhaps 20 meters before tumbling. Marcus examined the arrow, made adjustments to the fletching, and tried again. The second shot flew 40 meters in a straight line by the 10th shot. Marcus was hitting a tree trunk at 50 meters with consistent accuracy. Impossible, Kreitsch said flatly. Wood doesn't have the rigidity for precision at that range. Apparently, it does when shaped correctly, Brightness replied. Look at his technique. He's not just throwing force at the problem. Every component is optimized for a specific purpose. Day 3 demonstrated why Marcus had invested so much time in his bow. The monitoring feed showed him moving through the forest with the confidence of a predator. Bow in hand and a dozen arrows in a quiver he'd woven from flexible branches. He paused frequently to examine tracks, broken vegetation, and droppings from the local fauna. The target appeared near midday, a deer-like creature with 6 legs and bioluminescent spots along its spine. Grazing in a small clearing, perhaps 70 meters from Marcus's position, most candidates struggled to catch prey. The local fauna had evolved without pressure from tool-using predators and was skittish, but not particularly wary of the strange alien visitors. Still, getting close enough to kill with crude implements proved challenging. Marcus moved with deliberate slowness, using vegetation for cover, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs. When he reached a position 40 meters from his target, he stopped, drew an arrow, and waited. The deer analog shifted position, presenting a clear shot at its vital organs. The bow made almost no sound when Marcus released the arrow. The projectile flew in a flat arc and buried itself deep in the creature's chest cavity. The animal bolted, ran perhaps 30 meters, and collapsed. Clean kill, Kreitsch noted, making rapid annotations in his evaluation file. Single shot, minimal suffering. Efficient use of energy. Marcus approached the downed animal cautiously, ensured it was dead, and began the processing work. He used wooden knives with sharp edges he'd created by splitting and shaving harder wood species. Worked methodically to separate hide from meat and preserve both. The evaluators watched him construct a smoking rack over his fire using green wood that wouldn't burn easily, then hang strips of meat to cure. The process showed clear knowledge of food preservation techniques. Current evaluation? Brightness asked. Kreitsch reviewed his notes with 2 limbs, while continuing to monitor other candidates with the remaining appendages. Day 3, and the human has created a precision-ranged weapon from raw materials, demonstrated advanced understanding of wood properties, successfully hunted protein, and begun food preservation. His performance exceeds 70% of candidates at this stage. And the others who chose wood? 3 have already requested emergency extraction, Kreitsch admitted. 2 built shelters that collapsed, 1 started a fire that burned their camp. And the remaining 11 are still attempting to create functional tools. They continued watching as Marcus used the deer sinew to create stronger bowstrings, fashioned additional arrows with improved balance, and expanded his shelter using techniques that involved stripping bark in large sheets and layering them for weather resistance. By evening of the 3rd day, Marcus sat beside his fire, slowly eating cooked meat while working on what appeared to be a basket woven from thin branches. The scene looked almost peaceful, as if he were camping for recreation rather than being tested for species survival capability. He's not struggling, Brightness observed. Every other candidate is fighting to survive. The human is thriving. Kreitsch made another note in the evaluation file. Human demonstrates unexpected mastery of organic material manipulation. Recommend continued close observation. Subject may provide insights into alternative technology development paths. The senior evaluator felt something he rarely experienced during these assessments: genuine curiosity about what would happen next. If the human could achieve this much in 3 days, what would he accomplish in the remaining 7? Marcus finished his meal, added wood to his fire, and settled into his shelter. Overhead, invisible to him, microdrones captured every detail while evaluators from a dozen species began to take notice of the unusual performance. The examination had started as routine bureaucracy. But somewhere in a temperate forest, a human was turning it into something else, entirely a demonstration that the Coalition's assumptions about primitive materials might need serious reconsideration. The monitoring station's main observation deck filled with evaluators as word spread about the human candidate's unusual performance. What had started as routine examination oversight had become the most watched assessment in recent cycles, with senior coalition members requesting access to Marcus Chun's surveillance. Featcrich found himself explaining human capabilities to species he normally only encountered during formal council sessions. The attention would have been uncomfortable if it weren't so professionally gratifying. After 6,000 cycles of watching candidates barely scrape through minimum requirements, he finally had something interesting to evaluate. Day 4 began with Marcus surveying his camp's perimeter with obvious intent. He walked in expanding circles, examining ground slope, vegetation density, and natural choke points where the forest layout created narrow passages between thick growth. "What's he doing?" asked evaluator Shemra, a Valkyrie whose crystalline structure refracted the display lights into rainbow patterns. "Terrain assessment," Kreitz replied. "Notice how he's marking certain locations with small stacks of stones. He's planning something." They watched as Marcus began gathering specific materials. Long straight poles from young trees, flexible saplings that bent easily, bark cordage that he braided into increasingly thick ropes, and logs of various sizes. The collection process took most of the morning, and his organization suggested someone working from a detailed mental blueprint by afternoon. The first trap took shape. Marcus dug a small pit near one of the natural pathways he'd identified, lined it with fire-hardened wooden spikes angled upward, and covered the opening with a lattice of thin branches disguised with leaves and loose soil. The construction was surprisingly sophisticated, with a trigger mechanism that would collapse only under significant weight. A pit trap. Brightness observed. Basic but effective. "That's just the beginning," Kreitz said, noting how Marcus immediately moved to a second location. "Look at the spacing. He's creating overlapping coverage zones." The second trap demonstrated more complexity. Marcus bent a thick sapling nearly to the ground, securing it with a rope attached to a trigger system made from notched wooden pieces arranged in careful tension. When released, the sapling would snap upward with tremendous force, carrying a bundle of sharpened stakes, spring snare design, Kreitz documented. Estimated force sufficient to penetrate most medium-sized predator hides. The third trap made several evaluators vocalize surprise in their various languages. Marcus suspended a massive log, easily 300 kilograms, between two trees using a pulley system, created entirely from wooden components and bark rope. The trigger was a pressure plate hidden under leaf litter that, when stepped on, would release the counterweight and send the log swinging through the kill zone at bone-crushing speed. "That's engineering," Shemra said with obvious respect. "He's calculated force vectors, weight distribution, and timing. He's turning the forest into a weapon." Another evaluator added Marcus worked until dark, then resumed at first light on day 5. By midday, he had constructed 7 distinct traps arranged in a network that protected his camp from all obvious approach angles. Each trap was camouflaged. Each trigger was sensitive but stable, and the entire system showed tactical thinking that exceeded most species' military planning. "Assessment update?" the senior council observer asked, having joined the monitoring session. Personal Ickridge compiled his notes. "The human has created a defensive perimeter using only wooden materials and natural leverage. Each trap is individually lethal to medium-large predators. The network effect multiplies defensive capability exponentially. This represents the most sophisticated wooden technology demonstrated in examination history. Impressive for day 5, the council observer noted, but untested. "We should introduce the pressure evaluation early." Kreitz Santeni twitched with concern. "Standard protocol is day 7. The predator release gives candidates time to prepare." This candidate is clearly prepared. The council observer interrupted. I want to see how his system performs against actual threat. Authorize Alpha Predator release for Zone 7-3 immediately. The command went through channels quickly. Somewhere in the planet's predator containment facility, handlers began preparing one of the apex creatures for transport to Marcus's zone. Predator class? Crych asked. HFY Stalker, came the reply. 250 kilograms, 6-limbed locomotion. Enhanced olfactory tracking, armored hide. Documented kills of 43 candidate prey animals in previous examinations. The evaluators watched as the creature was transported and released 3 kilometers from Marcus's camp. The HFY Stalker resembled a bear crossed with an insect, featuring 6 powerful legs, mandibles that could crush bone, and a low-slung body covered in chitinous plates. That thing has killed candidates before, Brightness said quietly. It has, Crych confirmed. 3 emergency extractions and 1 fatality before we improved our monitoring protocols. The HFY Stalker caught. Marcus is sent almost immediately and began moving toward the camp with the patient determination of an experienced predator. It moved through the forest using game trails and natural cover. Approaching from the northwest, Marcus, unaware of the release threat, was inside his shelter weaving additional baskets and organizing his smoked meat supplies. His bow and arrows rested nearby, but he showed no signs of alarm. Should we warn him? Shemra asked. Negative, the council observer replied. Pressure testing requires authentic threat response. Warning him invalidates the assessment. The HFY Stalker entered Marcus's defensive perimeter at hour mark 3 of its stalk. It paused, sensory organs testing the air, then continued along what appeared to be an easy approach through moderately dense vegetation. The first trap activated with devastating efficiency. The HFY's weight triggered the pressure plate, releasing the suspended log. The massive wooden beam swung through its arc with a sound like thunder, striking the creature's midsection with enough force to lift it off the ground and throw it 3 meters. Sideways, the predator's armor plates cracked audibly. It roared in pain and fury, attempting to flee back the way it came. The second trap caught it perfectly. Creature's panicked retreat took it directly over the pit trap. The disguised covering collapsed, and the HFY fell onto the fire-hardened stakes. Multiple wooden spikes penetrated its underside where the armor was thinner, causing massive trauma. The predator thrashed, attempting to climb out, triggering the spring snare trap Marcus had positioned as overlapping coverage. The bent sapling released with explosive force. The bundle of sharpened stakes it carried struck the HFY's exposed flank, driving deep into flesh. The creature's roaring increased in pitch, then suddenly cut off. 30 seconds had elapsed from first trap activation to silence inside his shelter. Marcus looked up at the commotion, grabbed his bow, and emerged cautiously. He approached the defensive perimeter carefully, bow drawn, and discovered the HFY Stalker's body caught between traps. Clearly dead, the monitoring station erupted in multiple languages, expressing shock, disbelief, and admiration. It never even saw him, Shemra whispered. The human was making baskets. Another evaluator noted with something like awe. He didn't fight. He didn't hide. His traps did everything. Crych was making rapid notes, his manipulators moving so fast they blurred. Trap activation sequence optimal. Overlapping coverage prevented escape. Force multiplication exceeded Predator's defensive capabilities. Candidate demonstrated 0 direct risk exposure while achieving complete threat neutralization. Score assessment? The council observer demanded. Based on this performance alone? Crych said, unprecedented. No candidate has ever killed an alpha predator without injury to themselves. Most require emergency extraction when facing this threat level. Marcus, meanwhile, was examining the hexapod's body with professional interest. He retrieved his intact arrows from the traps, reset two of the mechanisms that could still function, and began processing the predator's corpse for additional materials. "He's harvesting it," Brightness observed, treating a creature that killed other candidates as a resource opportunity. By evening, Marcus had skinned the hexapod, collected its claws and teeth for potential tools, and added more meat to his smoking rack. He reinforced the damaged traps and added two additional snares using techniques refined from the successful deployment. The human sat by his fire that night, calmly eating while working on a new project, carving intricate patterns into a wooden bowl he'd hollowed from a tree burl in the monitoring station. Senior coalition members were already drafting reports about the examination's unexpected direction. The human didn't just survive the pressure test, the council observer said. He turned it into a demonstration of force multiplication and tactical superiority. "I want daily briefings on his remaining performance." Crouch watched Marcus through the surveillance feed, the human's calm expression showing no stress despite having just killed one of the planet's apex predators without even seeing it. Evaluator Crouch, Shemra asked, "Your professional opinion, could other species replicate these techniques?" Crouch considered carefully. The techniques themselves are teachable. The trap mechanics follow basic physics. But the integration, the tactical thinking, the systematic approach, that might be uniquely human. The monitoring station had become something approaching a social gathering by day 7. Evaluators from species that normally avoided each other shared observation space, united by curiosity about what the human would do next. Betting pools had formed strictly unofficial about Marcus's final assessment score. Crouch had given up trying to maintain professional distance from the examination. His reports to the council had shifted from routine documentation to detailed analysis of human technological development through wooden materials. And senior members were actually reading them. "He's expanding the shelter," Brightness announced, drawing immediate attention to the primary display. Marcus had spent the early morning hours of day 7 marking out a larger area adjacent to his original lean-to, using wooden stakes and bark cordage to create what looked like a construction site layout. The precision of his measurements accomplished, using nothing more than his own body dimensions and notched sticks suggested someone working from architectural plans. Most candidates are satisfied with basic weather protection, Shemra observed. "Why invest time in expansion?" "Because he can," Crouch replied, studying Marcus's methodical preparation. "He's not just surviving, he's demonstrating capability. Watch how he's selecting materials." Marcus moved through his established territory, choosing specific trees with obvious criteria. He tested bark for thickness and flexibility, examined grain patterns by making small test cuts, and even tapped trunks to assess internal density by sound. The first structural element revealed his intent clearly. Marcus harvested several straight poles approximately 4 meters long and as thick as his arm, stripped them carefully to remove bark while preserving the smooth wood underneath, and began setting them into the ground in a rectangular pattern. Foundation posts, an evaluator identified. "He's building elevated flood protection and predator deterrence," Crouch noted. "Raising the living space above ground level reduces risk from both water and ground-dwelling threats." The construction process fascinated the observers because Marcus used no artificial bindings or metal fasteners. Instead, he carved joints directly into the wood using techniques that required precise measurements and careful. Cutting the first joint demonstrated his skill level. Marcus cut a rectangular notch in one vertical post, then shaped the end of a horizontal beam to fit that notch exactly. When he slotted the pieces together, they locked with satisfying precision, the weight of the beam creating natural compression that held everything stable joinery. Kreitsch accessed historical construction databases. Humans developed elaborate systems for connecting wooden components without fasteners. That particular style resembles Earth's Japanese carpentry traditions. It's beautiful, Shimura said. Functional art. Marcus worked through day 7 and into day 8 with patient craftsmanship. He built a platform approximately 4 meters square and 1 meter above ground level, using interlocking joints throughout that. Distributed weight evenly across all supporting posts, the platform became the foundation for walls constructed from split logs arranged vertically and fitted together with remarkable tightness. Marcus used wooden wedges to force the logs into perfect alignment, creating walls with minimal gaps. Weather sealing? Someone asked. Watch. Kreitsch replied. Marcus began applying a mixture he'd created from clay deposits found near a stream, mixed with plant fibers for strength. He worked this material into any small gaps between logs, smoothed it carefully, and left it to dry while he moved on to the roof structure. The roof demonstrated even more sophistication. Marcus built it in layers using multiple techniques combined for maximum protection. The first layer consisted of thin wooden strips arranged in a lattice pattern that provided structural support. The second layer used large sheets of bark he'd carefully peeled from dead trees. These shed water naturally. The third layer added bundles of dried grass arranged in overlapping shingles. The fourth and final layer returned to bark sheets as a waterproof cap. 4-layer roof system. An evaluator noted with audible surprise. That will handle everything from rain to hail to snow. The insulation value alone exceeds most species' permanent housing. Another added day 8 brought additional refinements that transformed the shelter from adequate to impressive. Marcus constructed a separate entrance room, a small covered area before the main door that prevented rain from entering when he went in or out. He built raised sleeping platforms inside to keep him further from any cold or damp that might penetrate the floor. He even installed a ventilation system using bamboo-like tubes that allowed smoke from a small internal fire pit to exit while preventing rain from entering. The most surprising addition came in the afternoon when Marcus diverted a small stream using channels he dug and lined with clay, directing water to flow through a filtering system he built from layers of sand, gravel, and charcoal. The filtered water collected in a carved wooden reservoir attached to his shelter. Running water, Brightness said flatly. He has running water in a wooden structure. Gravity-fed system, Kreitsch observed. No moving parts required. Simple physics applied with sophisticated understanding of water behavior. Marcus wasn't finished by evening of day 8. He had added a separate structure near his main shelter, smokehouse built with similar joinery techniques, but designed with different airflow properties. He hung the remaining meat from his hunts inside, maintaining a low fire that would preserve the food for extended periods. Day 9 brought finishing touches that elevated the entire compound beyond anything previously seen in examination history. Marcus built a workshop area with organized storage for his various tools: bows, arrows, knives, scrapers, awls, wedges, mallets, and baskets. Each item had a designated location. Hanging from wooden pegs or resting in carved holders, he constructed an elevated cache, small platform built high in a tree using rope and wooden rungs where he stored food supplies safe from ground-based predators. He added a primitive but functional lock to his main shelter door, a wooden mechanism that used gravity in carefully carved shapes to create a system that could only be opened from inside or with a specific key he'd carved. The monitoring station's displays showed detailed scans of the compound from multiple angles. Engineering evaluators ran structural analysis programs that confirmed what they were seeing. Load distribution optimal, one reported. His joint system actually gets stronger under weight. Weather resistance exceeds 70% of coalition member species' standard housing. Another added, the elevated design, the layered roof, the water system, the separate functional areas. Shemra gestured at the display with crystalline appendages. This isn't the survival shelter. This is architecture. Request permission to interview the candidate. A senior engineering evaluator asked the council observer. Denied, came the reply. Examination protocol prohibits contact until completion. However, I want him to demonstrate his construction techniques during debriefing. Several member species could benefit from these methods. Kreitsch was compiling what had become a comprehensive report on human wooden technology applications. His notes now exceeded any previous examination documentation by a factor of 7. And he was still discovering new details every time he reviewed the surveillance footage. Evaluator Kreitsch. The council observer addressed him directly. Preliminary score assessment? Kreitsch pulled up his evaluation matrix. Shelter construction. Exceeds maximum rating scale. Defensive capability. Unprecedented. Resource management. Optimal. Innovation. Revolutionary. Teachability. High. Sustainability. Excellent. Numerical score? Based on standard assessment criteria? Kreitsch's antennae twitched. 94 points. I'm deducting only for failure to demonstrate aquatic capabilities, which weren't necessary given his environmental zone and compared to other candidates. The second highest score this cycle is 61 points, Kreitsch replied. Most are clustered around 45. The observation deck fell quiet as evaluators considered the implications. Marcus, unaware of the attention or the scores or the debate his performance had sparked, sat on his shelter's covered entrance porch as evening approached. He was working on another wooden bowl, carving it with a knife he'd shaped from a hexapaw tooth hafted to a wooden handle. The human looked comfortable, almost peaceful, as if he were spending a pleasant vacation rather than completing a survival examination that most species found brutally difficult. 1 day remaining. Brightness observed. What else could he possibly demonstrate? With humans? Kreitsch said, I've learned not to assume anything. They seem to view limitations as suggestions rather than boundaries. Inside his sophisticated wooden compound, Marcus added wood to his fire, ate smoked meat from his ample stores, drank clean filtered water, and settled onto his comfortable sleeping platform. Outside, his trap network stood ready to defend his territory while he rested. The examination was nearly complete. But the real assessment had just begun. The Galactic Coalition was starting to understand that humanity's relationship with primitive materials represented not technological backwardness but mastery. So complete, they had exhausted its possibilities before moving forward, and that realization was going to change everything. Day 10 arrived with clear skies and the kind of morning light that made the forest look like something from a painting. Marcus emerged from his shelter, stretched, and began his usual routine of checking trap integrity, collecting water, and preparing breakfast from his preserved food stores in orbit. The monitoring station prepared for examination conclusion. Transport vessels were being assigned for candidate extraction. Medical teams stood ready for those who had sustained injuries, and evaluation reports were being compiled across all 47 participants. Kreitsch had barely slept during the final 3 days, too focused on documenting every detail of Marcus's performance. His report had grown into something approaching a research paper rather than a simple assessment, and he knew it would generate debate within the Coalition Council for cycles to come. Extraction begins in 2 hours, the council observer announced. Final observations? The human is preparing something, Brightness noted. Directing attention to the primary display, Marcus had gathered materials near the stream-long straight poles. Bark cordage, and what appeared to be additional waterproofing materials. He worked with the same methodical precision that had characterized all his construction projects. He's building a boat, Shemro realized. On the final day, he's demonstrating aquatic capability. The craft took shape quickly. Marcus lashed poles together to create a frame, wove smaller branches between them for structure, and sealed everything with the clay fiber mixture he'd used for his shelter walls. By midday, he had a functional raft approximately 2 meters long that floated stable when he tested it in the stream. That completes the assessment categories, Kreitsch noted. Making a final annotation: ground mobility, aerial awareness through trap placement, resource management, and now aquatic capability. He's addressed every evaluation criterion. Score update? The council observer demanded. 97 points, Kreitsch replied, deducting only 3 points for not constructing the aquatic vessel earlier in the examination period. Though it clearly wasn't necessary for his own assignment, that score would rank first in examination history. Another evaluator observed by 16 points, Kreitsch confirmed. The previous record was 81 points set 400 cycles ago by a creche candidate who later became a military commander. The extraction vessels descended at precisely the scheduled time. Candidates were collected from their zones and transported to the orbital station's medical and debriefing facilities. The exhausted, injured, and traumatized members of various species stumbled from their transports, looking like survivors of genuine catastrophes. Marcus Chun stepped from his transport, looking like someone returning from a camping trip. He carried his bow, several arrows, the wooden bowl he'd finished carving, and wore a hexapaw hide vest he'd fashioned during the final morning. His vital signs showed normal ranges, his physical condition was excellent, and his demeanor was calm. Human Marcus Chen. Kreitsch greeted him formally. You have completed the Galactic Coalition Survival Assessment. Follow me for medical examination and debriefing. Did I pass? Marcus asked with what might have been humor. We'll discuss your results after medical clearance, Kreitsch replied, gesturing toward the medical bay. The examination was brief. Human physiology was now well documented in coalition databases, and Marcus showed no injuries, infections, or concerning symptoms. The medical technician cleared him quickly with obvious bewilderment that someone could complete 10 days in wilderness without requiring any treatment. The debriefing chamber was larger than necessary for a single candidate. Marcus realized immediately that the room's gallery seating was filled with evaluators from multiple species, all watching him with undisguised interest. Please be seated. Kreitsch indicated a chair at a central table where holographic displays showed surveillance footage from Marcus's examination. That's more of an audience than I expected, Marcus observed, sitting comfortably despite the attention. Your performance has attracted considerable interest, Kreitsch said, activating the displays. Let's review your assessment. The presentation began with statistical comparisons. 47 candidates, 16 species, various material choices, and outcome distributions. Most candidates scored between 35 and 60 points. 3 had been eliminated due to medical emergencies. 2 had failed completely. Then Kreitsch displayed Marcus's footage, alongside other candidates for direct comparison, while others struggled to create basic hand axes from stone. Marcus crafted precision recurve bows, while others built crude lean-tos that leaked and collapsed. Marcus constructed an architectural compound with running water, while others fled from predators or required rescue. Marcus killed an apex predator without being present. The gallery remained silent through the presentation, though Marcus noticed several species engaging in what appeared to be agitated discussion in their native languages. Human Marcus Chun. Kreitsch spoke formally. Your final assessment score is 97 points out of a possible 100. This represents the highest score in 6,000 examination cycles. You have passed the Galactic Coalition Survival Assessment with unprecedented distinction. Marcus nodded, showing neither surprise nor excessive pride. Thank you. I enjoyed the challenge. Enjoyed? Shemra spoke from the gallery. You treated a survival examination like recreational activity. Because I was prepared, Marcus replied simply. The examination tested primitive resourcefulness using natural materials. Humans spent thousands of years developing exactly those skills because we needed them to survive on Earth. Most species moved quickly from basic tools to advanced materials, Kreitsch observed. Why did humans invest so heavily in wooden technology? Marcus considered the question. Because wood was everywhere. Every human culture lived near trees, and trees were renewable, versatile, and forgiving to work with. We didn't abandon wood because it was primitive. We exhausted its possibilities before moving forward. The bow I made uses principles that Earth's ancient cultures perfected over millennia. The joinery in my shelter represents techniques from at least 6 different human traditions. The traps incorporate knowledge from dozens of cultures. You're saying human wooden technology is sophisticated because you spent longer developing it? An evaluator asked. I'm saying we treated it seriously, Marcus replied. You see wood as a simple material, so you make simple things from it. We saw wood as having potential, so we unlocked that potential through innovation across thousands of years. The council observer stood. Human Marcus Chun, your performance has raised questions about coalition assessment methodology. We designed this examination to test basic survival capability, not to evaluate advanced material engineering. With respect, Marcus said carefully. Maybe that's the problem. You're testing whether species can barely survive using primitive materials. You should be testing whether they can thrive using those materials. Survival is just staying alive. Thriving is building something worth living in. The gallery erupted in multiple languages. Some species seemed offended by Marcus's directness, while others appeared thoughtful. Kreitsch raised a limb for silence. The human raises a valid point. Our examination has become routine because we expect minimal competence rather than mastery. Perhaps we've forgotten that primitive doesn't mean simple. Humanity's application for coalition membership is approved, the council observer announced. Furthermore, based on this assessment, humans will receive specialist classification in adaptive engineering and resource optimization. Your species will be valuable in frontier development and crisis situations. Thank you. Marcus stood. If I may ask, what happens to the other human candidates? Sarah Chun scored 68 points with stone as her material choice. Kreitsch consulted his records. James Washington scored 71 points using metal ore. Both passed comfortably. Your species' overall performance is exceptional. They're good people, Marcus agreed. We learned from each other during preparation. One final request, Kreitsch said. Would you be willing to conduct a demonstration of your techniques for coalition engineering teams? Several species have expressed interest in learning human wooden construction methods. Marcus smiled. I'd be happy to. Though I should warn you, what I showed in 10 days is just the basics. Human wooden technology goes much deeper than recurve bows and joinery. Deeper? Shemra asked. How much deeper? My people built ocean-crossing ships entirely from wood, Marcus replied. Constructed buildings that stood for thousands of years. Created musical instruments of extraordinary complexity. Fashioned clockwork mechanisms, designed water wheels and windmills. And developed entire schools of martial arts around wooden weapons. What I demonstrated was wilderness survival, not the full scope of human wooden engineering. The gallery fell silent again as the implications settled over the assembled evaluators. Perhaps, the council observer said slowly, the coalition has much to learn from humanity's approach to so-called primitive materials. Later, after the official proceedings concluded, Kreitch approached Marcus privately in the observation lounge where humans could see Earth through the viewport. "I wanted to thank you," the evaluator said. 6,000 cycles of watching candidates barely survive had made me cynical about these assessments. It reminded me why we conduct them, not to measure,